Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush. And today I have another wonderful guest from the RushFans community, Mr. Paul Simon. Paul, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And before we get into the main topic of the video, I just wanted to show off some of my latest Rush editions. I've actually managed to get some of the Rush box sets that have the sort of albums in them. So I've got like pretty much all the albums now on CD. This was one I picked up just recently, was the Atlantic Years box set, which the album that we're talking about today is in that box set. And I also managed to get sectors 1, 2, and 3.
Nice.
I
Very
was saying to
nice.
Paul on before we started, sector 1 and 3, I was able to get those brand new. Sector 2, I had to get secondhand, and it was more expensive. So, but it does have, you know, a lot of the beloved albums in it. So,
Exactly.
okay. So, Paul, if you could introduce to my viewers the album that we're going to be talking about today, a little bit of the background behind it, and most importantly, why you wanted to cover this album with me.
Happily. So we're going to be talking about Presto. This is actually the tour book from the tour. Presto came out November 21st, 1989, and it was my first brand new Rush album. I got into Rush in 1988 when hearing a commercial, a record store commercial for A Show of Hands, the live album that came before it. And that commercial had Marathon playing, and that hooked me. So a friend of mine who was very into Rush, I'd heard Tom Sawyer, I'd heard Spirit of Radio. I was 17. Wasn't that into them. Matter of fact, the song I knew best was probably New World Man, because I was listening to like America's Top 40 and following the Billboard charts, and that was actually the highest charting single that Rush ever had on the Billboard US charts. So that was what I was more familiar with. But the minute I heard Marathon, I was hooked. So Presto ended up being not only the first album I bought brand new when it came out on release night at midnight. I did stay up and go to the record store for the midnight release of it, but also my first Rush concert. So in 1990, I caught the tour up in Alpine Valley, East Troy, Wisconsin, in the U.S. It's just outside Chicago, which is where I'm from. So yeah, it was my first Rush album, new, and my first concert of theirs. So it could be a very polarizing album with Rush fans. It is a transitional period for them. There's a lot of differences we'll talk about from their previous releases to this one, but it's got the special place in my heart because you always love your first, and Presto's
Yeah,
mine.
no, that's fair enough. So yeah, this is an interesting album because I'd heard that this was the album where they were trying to go back towards a more guitar-based sound. And as we'll get into it, there is a more guitar-based sound, but it's not quite as simple as that, is it?
Not even
But
close.
yeah, so let's go through it track by track. The first song is Show Don't Tell. Oh, by the way, that's the actual CD cover from the box set that I had there. So yeah, the first song is Show Don't Tell. This one gave me a jump scare when I first listened to it because it starts off with this really quiet tuned percussion like marimbas and that sort of thing. And I thought, oh, I need to crank it up a bit. It's not very loud. And then the guitars come in and oh.
Very much intentional on their part. That was their we mean business approach.
Yeah. The lyric to me seems to be about sort of being a skeptic, you know, not taking things on faith, always needing evidence for, you know, don't tell me about something, show me. Um, yeah. Um, there's definitely more prominent guitar on this than there was on Hold Your Fire. I mean, Hold Your Fire was, I didn't hear a lot of Alex on that album. I did that one like really early on in this series. I think it was like the second or third episode I did. But there's still plenty of keys on this song. You know, it's not completely good. It's not like those sort of 90s albums like, you know, Counterparts and Test for Echo, where it's almost entirely guitar based. There's still plenty of keyboards in this, and there's a little bass solo from Geddy, which I really like, and the guitar that Alex plays in the sort of middle section almost has a bit of a Trevor Rabin feel to me, that sort of 80s era yes. It's yeah, there's no real guitar solo as such, but there's just some interesting little parts that Alex throws in. So yeah, it's a good way to start the album.
Yeah, the elephant in the room every time Presto comes up is the mix, and what it is they were working. This was you mentioned Atlantic Records, that actually factors into this. They had just finished their last album with Mercury, and they all three of them have described that relationship in interviews as going stale. And they did want to get down to a more stripped sound of just a three piece, and they wanted a change of producers. They went with Rupert Hine. Neil had actually they'd originally asked for him when they shifted from the Terry Brown years, and they originally asked Rupert Hine to produce Grace Under Pressure. He was busy at the time. Plus, he had said in later interviews that he wasn't sure that he was the right person to do Rush, hearing their back catalog. But over time, that got cleared up, and they asked him for this one, and he said yes, he was available. But it was basically it was Neil's idea originally, based on Rupert has produced The Fix and Saga, another Canadian band, and another really hot song right before this that I usually point to sound wise, sonically, is Better Be Good to Me from Tina Turner. So
Mm.
that was Rupert's sort of music. He'd done a couple of albums that didn't fit that, but mostly he was known as a synth or a pop producer. So he was a little confused when they explained they wanted to strip down their sound, get back to basics of a three piece. The albums that of Rupert's that Neil liked were actually solo albums. He did a trilogy of solo albums, Rupert Hine, called Immunity, Waving Not Drowning, and The Wildest Wish to Fly. That sound that was on those albums are what attracted the band to Rupert. So that's, as much as hindsight later they would say, oh, we wish we could change this sound, or you know that was initially what they were going for. So it was,
Yeah,
I call it a transitional period. So where before, the first thing Rupert did, and this does factor into Show Don't Tell as well as the rest of the songs and the rest of their catalog after this album, is uh, Rupert said he wanted Geddy to stop going automatically so high, both frequency and volume wise, and expand the dynamics of his vocal range. In other words, start here, have a place to go. Show Don't Tell is a great example of that. When you hear how the first verse goes, and then when the chorus comes in, it sort of amps up, both in, he goes up a register, and uh, volume wise, it increases too.
yeah,
So that's something to notice. And Getty would continue to do that for the rest of their careers. So this
yeah,
was the start of that. This album was the start of that approach to vocals. Similarly, the mix, the reason they mixed it the way they did and got the sound it did was they wanted the music to support the vocal. They wanted the vocal to be up front. So it does sound very unique. It doesn't sound really like any other Rush album except Roll the Bones, the next one, which was also produced by Rupert Hine. But this was the start of that era, and that's why.
yeah. No, fair enough.
So
And of course, Rupert Hine is a keyboard player himself. So
yes, and
that,
he said, "Leave him at home.
yeah,
We'll bring a couple in."
yeah. So then we
And
get Chain Lightning.
yep,
And Geddy's playing bass chords in this song. And I've already said in other episodes, I'm a sucker for when Geddy's playing bass chords. Um, the lyric is about um, sort of persisting, um, you know, um, yeah, it's quite a poppy vocal melody, despite the sort of rock instrumentation behind it. So again, I guess that's what you were talking about with that production choices and that sort of thing. There's a
mhm.
cool little Alex solo in it. It's a pretty straightforward song musically. Um, and I did have a question for this one. Who is it who says "that's nice" at the end of the
That's
song?
Alex.
Oh,
That's
okay.
Alex. And it's funny you mentioned the solo. The solo is backwards.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna be full of lots of little trivia on this album. I'm a lyrics junkie, and I'm very into the history, especially this period. Uh, One thing is most Rush albums have a unifying theme. This one seemed to elude people. Neil has said in interviews that it was more of a motif than a theme, and it was response and perception. So every song that we address, you can find the theme of perception in each song of some kind. Now, Chain Lightning, for example, well, let's go back to Show Don't Tell with Perception real quick. You had it right as far as using the courtroom metaphor. When they played it live, it's show me, don't tell me. In other words, it's not, don't tell me how things look, tell me how things are.
Mm.
So there's the perception motif in that. When they played it live, they actually had, that's where the Presto circus rabbits started coming out of the hats on stage, that kind of thing. There was even a little cartoon of a magician. So the whole idea of twisting perception. So with Chain Lightning, where perception comes into it, is the song was this is one of the few times where Neil was very specific about the inspiration. He was watching a meteor shower, and he was a self-admitted weather junkie. So he was watching a meteor shower with his daughter, and the I believe it was on a boat, looking up at the sky, and he said reflected in another pair of eyes. The shared response and the shared experience of that phenomenon of that meteor shower, or then he started elaborating on sundogs and other natural phenomenon. Chain Lightning is all about how one thing happens and another thing happens and another thing happens. So the chorus of respond, vibrate, feedback, and resonate is all about the shared experience.
Mm.
So it's a
Yeah.
metaphor. A very lyrically rich album.
What I
So
had in my notes that I couldn't initially read because my
mhm.
handwriting is terrible, by the way, is that the lyric is about sort of, to me, what I got out of it is like the idea of positivity being infectious.
Yes, infectious is the key word. Positivity
Yeah.
being what we would like to be what is carried around. But yes,
Mm.
infectious, you nailed it. It's all about that response and that shared experience. So, and
Yeah.
that'll come up again in future songs as well.
Yeah. So then we get the pass, which starts with more bass chords, which I love. Um, you know, it starts off sounding like a ballad, but then it kicks in when the verse comes along or after the verse comes along. Really catchy chorus, this song, a very sing-along sort of chorus. Um, the lyrics I found very interesting. Um, there's it's sort of like the confidence of youth suddenly crashing down. Um, the person that the song is being sung to seems to be, contemplating ending it, um, and the singer is trying to convince them not to. Um, and I love the full stop ending of this song. It comes right to it doesn't fade out. It comes to a full stop, which I think is perfect for this song.
Agreed. Yeah, the lyrical inspiration came. Neil was having a conversation with a friend of his on a bike ride, and they were talking about suicide and how he knew it was going to be a very complex song lyrically. So he did look into actually some case studies of college students and their stories. But what he found was a sort of a not a theme, but a common thread was how sometimes these stories, when told by the survivors, the people who are left behind, seem to almost take on a literate quality. I don't want to say heroic because that's the wrong word, but it's
Mm,
close. Which is why he wrote the lyrics. Someone said a bad example made surrender seem all right. The act of the nobility is the word he uses in
mm,
interviews. The act of a noble warrior who's lost the will to fight, and he wanted to basically smash that.
yeah,
He said, "No, you're leave. This is a very jarring thing, and there's no judgment involved, but it is about the remains, that it leaves behind for the survivors. That there's nothing heroic in this act. It's a tragedy. Period."
yeah.
So that
Absolutely.
was the main point. So all three members have said this is their favorite song off the album. It
Hmm.
lasted the longest as far as being played live on future tours. Was played on the Presto tour as well. Um, I I mentioned the show don't tell was Chain Lightning was not. The Past was played live. And he even adds a little bit of literary license. All of us get lost in the darkness. Dreamers learn to steer by the stars. All of us do time in the gutter. Dreamers turn to look at the cars. That's actually, he took some literary license and he borrowed it. I can't remember who from, which writer, but he freely admitted that was inspired by somebody else.
Yeah.
So that was where the lyric came from. And then musically, you nailed it. It's a beautiful song. It's a tragic song, and it makes that point on that hard stop. I agree. There was a music video made for there was one made for Show Don't Tell, which was the advanced single. The Past got a music video, and I can't remember if Andrew McNaughton was the director for that one or not, but it looks like I think it was McNaughton because he's the one who did the photography, the three portraits on the back of the CD in the album.
Hmm.
That's his style of photography. And in this video, it's that whole late 80s, early 90s, almost Matt Maharon looking shadows and how tricks of light and black and white. And when that crash comes in, it shows our our subject in the song stepping off a ledge, and then it shows the Walkman falling and shattering on the ground. So the visual is very jarring.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it makes it.
Yeah. So the next song is War Paint. This song seems to be about being who you are, not who you sort of see. We sort of look in the mirror and don't necessarily see the actual. We see what we want to see rather than what's actually there. Um, the music is fairly simple by Rush standards, anthemic in parts. I find this song. Um, it does have that sort of half-time, double-time trick that Rush like to do a lot, which I've always been a fan of. But yeah, it's quite a simple song lyrically and musically. But yeah, it's a good one.
The Past and Warpaint were the way I've always explained it when I explained my love for this album. These two songs back to back were my subdivisions. So the
Hmm.
fans who have been there from the start or who gravitate towards that era, that earlier era of their discography, always point to subdivisions and say, that's the song I relate to. 17-year-old me between The Past and Warpaint, those two songs back to back are the ones I grabbed onto. They did play this live, and actually, Neil has said in interviews uh, that the drums were his words, not mine, moronically simple, but because the song demanded it with that martial beat, the idea of war paint and the
Yeah.
as the both verses, first it's the girl putting on the makeup to try and look a certain way and be perceived. There it is again, a
Yeah.
certain way. Then the boy trying to puff himself up and polishing the car in the garage and all that. And then, I have to take the princess tonight. So it's all about puffing themselves up with vanity, like you said, how they're
Hmm.
perceived, what they're trying to put out there. And what he is saying is, let's smash that. Let paint that mirror that you're using, paint it black. Everybody, boys and girls together, let's all do this way. But the drum thing I was mentioning, Neil wrote the drum line for this simple because the song needed it to be simple, but
Hmm.
then the choruses and in that coda, that very strong anthemic ending, which is my favorite part of the album. Um, I'm a sucker for big crescendos. Uh, he said he put his fills and his most fun parts to play in those two parts, so he had something to look forward to when playing it live.
Yeah.
So,
No, fair enough.
yep.
So then we get on to Scars, which starts off with this sort of slap bass, which I'm almost certain that's not Getty playing that, is it? It's keyboard. It's like the
It is sequenced.
sequencer. Yeah.
It is sequenced.
D-
Very good.
does Getty actually play slap bass anywhere, or is that just not his style?
It's not his style.
Yeah.
He it was referred to by others as slap bass, some other songs on various albums, but he was, as a matter of fact, I think he said in his most recent TV show unless I'm confusing it with, I just got done reading My Effing Life as well as
Yeah,
autobiography, which I have right here.
excellent.
So he has said in either his TV show or his book that he does not play slap bass, but that style was used on purpose for this. The rhythm and the drum line that was written for it. Neil in 1988 did his cycling tour through Africa, which would eventually become the meat of his 1996 book, Masked Rider. So,
Yeah,
as much as he normally avoids autobiographical lyrics, the one line he said was autobiographical that inspired this whole song was, "I've heard the lions hunting in the Serengeti night."
yeah,
So, musically, it's that call and response
yeah,
style of music from that part of the world that inspired the music writing on the song.
yeah. No, fair enough. But the slap bass gives this song a real sort of funky feel, which again is not a sort of typical Rush sound. Um, you know, um, the lyric is about scars staying with us and recurring, um, be it positive or negative. Um, you know, there's some sort of screechy guitar, sort of adding an atmospheric quality to it, with the synth pads going along. Um, there's some complex drums from Neil here, but it's still quite a poppy song regardless. It's And then there's some actual bass playing comes in at the end of the song.
Yes. And lyrically, you nailed it too, as well, on this one. Scars of pleasure, scars of pain. Atmospheric changes make them sensitive again. The way it was described in interviews is an emotional fingerprint of a memory or experience. So, in other words, anything from a smell can suddenly remind you of experiences you've had. Um, but it brings us back to those individual experiences. So as far as emotional fingerprint, it's again going with the theme of perception. It's all about uh, reading about, for example, reading about the Serengeti is much different than being there, experiencing it, hearing it, smelling it, being surrounded by this whole
Yeah,
different world. So told
yeah,
you this was a
no,
layered album.
yeah. So then we get the title track, Presto. Um, this one, um, this one seems to me the lyric is about wanting to do things to improve yourself or improve life or improve things for other people, but but wanting to do it the easy way rather than putting the hard work in.
Yes.
Um, the narrator seems to be aware that's the case too, that he's trying to take the easy way. He's trying to fit everything in. Hence the name Presto.
Yes.
Um, Mostly acoustic guitars on this song, which again is not a typical Rush sound. Um, it gives it a different feel. There's a great Alex solo though. It's a short one, but it's a really cool solo. Um, but again, I've mentioned this on a couple of the 90s albums that I've covered, or even on Vapor Trails, I think. When Alex goes into using the sort of acoustic guitars this way, it gives it that kind of alternative rock feel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely the way I've described this is sort of like a photo negative to Power Windows, where with Power Windows, the synths and the keys were like held up the mid range so much, and the guitar provided the flourishes. This is the opposite. This album it's got that acoustic strumming uh, bass, but then there are the electric lines that come in the choruses, the bridges, and then in that outro. Um, and then the keys are very light flourishes. So, like I said, sort of the opposite of the photo negative
Mm,
of Power Windows. As far as the lyric goes, yeah, actually, the whole thing started with when I radiate more heat than light was the first lyric that came to his mind, and then as it developed, I didn't find this out until many years later. Matter of fact, it was only about 2 years ago uh, when I started doing my own deep dives before I even joined RushFans as a channel. And then when we got around to the roundtables with this, uh, Neil had said in an interview for counterparts when he was discussing the song Cold Fire, how that he wrote that the same song style as a Paul Simon song would be. So naturally, it caught my ear. About a conversation between a man and a woman. And the man has these lofty goals. In other words, if I could wave my magic wand, I'd make everything all right, I'd set everybody free. And the woman is the realist
Mm,
in this circumstance. So if you'll notice the way the lyrics change throughout the song from these two different vantage points, he's, looking down in this romantic, way of looking down, saying, I look down at a million houses and I wonder what you're doing tonight. And she's like, yeah, well, reality sets in. And while you're at it, if you could wave your magic wand and set everybody free, that'd be great too, but you can't. So
mm,
he's more obtuse. That was the literary uh, tools he used to write the lyrics. Neil was actually studying writing. That's why this is written so richly and so deeply, and it is a definite tone change from the albums that came before it. This is where he was studying different writing styles around
yeah,
this time, and even trying prose. And we'll see some of that in some future songs. But yeah, so that's why there's so many layers on this one too.
yeah.
And Radiate
So
More
that,
Heat Than Light, full of hot air.
yeah. So then we get into the second half of the album, and we get the song Superconductor. Starts off in 7/4. I always love it when Rush do different time signatures because I'm a prog guy from way back. So um, yeah, the lyric seems to be like a pointed critique of top 40 music, um,
Nailed it.
which they did something similar on Power Windows, didn't they?
Yep.
Oh, I'm trying to think of the song. What was it?
Give me a minute. I got to go through my albums. Not Big Money, not Marathon, not Manhattan Project, not Territories, not Emotion Detector. Emotion, it's there's a,
Mm,
I wouldn't really call it a callback there. I'd probably have to give it more thought.
yeah.
I'm so in tune with Presto the last 2 weeks. I did
Yeah, no,
concurrence
no,
as
no,
well.
fair enough.
So,
Um, I like how the choruses are up tempo and the bridges are more laid back. Um, Again, quite a sing-along vocal melody. Um, there's a lot of this on this album so far. As you were saying at the beginning, this album seems to be more focused on the vocals than a usual Rush album, which is usually more focused on the instrumentation. Um, Parts of it are almost poppy, you know.
I believe Superconductor was poppy on purpose. It's
Yeah,
it's it's acting like what it's criticizing on purpose. It's a very catchy song, get you in a soft place. The melody's so
yeah,
sweet. So,
yeah.
absolutely.
So then we get Anagram for Mongo, and my very first question is, who's Mongo?
The movie Blazing Saddles. This is people always say how
Oh
Dog Years on
yeah.
Test for Echo is like, wow, this sticks out like a sore thumb. They've got the sense of humor. This is them being
Mm,
cheeky. This is them being funny. Candygram for Mongo, the movie line from Blazing Saddles, where Cleavon Little walks in with the candygram and Mongo takes the candy and it blows up.
yeah,
So it's a song filled with anagrams in its lyrics, but they didn't want to just call it anagram because that's boring. So they went
yeah,
anagram for Mongo.
yeah,
That's why.
yeah. So I noticed that the lyrics seem to be sort of plays on words and rather than having a direct meaning. And so yeah, you've kind of confirmed that. Again, the choruses are very poppy compared to slightly more rocking verses. Um, Interesting coming after Superconductor that this song has quite a mainstream sound for sort of mid to late 80s.
Yep. Piano from Jason Snyderman. He is credited on the album with additional piano and keyboards. This is one of the songs he played on. And yeah, every single line has, I mentioned that Neil was studying writing. So the lyrics, while they're cohesive sounding on purpose, there isn't, a set story being told here like a narration, but this is him experimenting with his writing styles. And I love things like reasoning is partly insane. Insane, all those the letters that are in the word insane are in the word reasoning, not all of reasoning. There's some letters left over. Image is just an eyeless game. Take the eye
Mm,
out of image, you have game. So every single line of the song fits that motif. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
I love it. but that's just them being cheeky. So they've got that air about them. It's not
Yeah,
doesn't always have to be about hobbits and power.
yeah. Well, look, funnily enough, I noticed their humor when I was doing hemispheres
Yeah.
in the instrumental of Il Estrangiato. That
Hmm.
song, that instrumental, it's very, complex and, lots of great playing and all that. But it's also funny, you
Yes.
know.
That's
Um,
exact. It's always there, but people always. I shouldn't say always. Sometimes we as fans can almost approach them with this reverence that was written about in many songs, including Limelight, where it's like, no, they're just people. That's why,
yeah,
and I know you've already covered Test for Echo with Ryan, but a song like Dog Years or a song like Anagram, there's whimsy. Get over it. It's awesome. So,
yeah. So then we get Red Tide, and this is another theme that goes through um, Rush's albums. Red, you know, things like Red Sector A and so on.
red
Um,
lenses.
yeah, Red Lenses. Um, lyrically, I felt like this could almost fit in the Fear song cycle.
Good
Um,
pick.
you know, the difference being that the exhortations to fight against the fear in this song rather than just talking about the fear. There's a lot of exhortations in this song to fight it and battle it. This is a very keyboard based song in the verses.
Yes.
The guitars kick in sort of for the rest of the song. Again, we've got those anthemic qualities coming through in this song. Um, there's another short solo from Alex that reminds me of Trevor Rabin a little bit with those sort of, noisy things that he would do. And again,
Mhm.
nice full ending to this song.
Yes, they wanted this one to sound big because uh, Red Tide being an the song's an environmental warning. This is a lot like Distant Early Warning, or
Mm,
even same. It would be at home on an album like Grace Under Pressure. This song is the whole song is a warning. Red Tide is an environmental disaster that is occurring in nature as we speak, and it's obviously near and dear to Neil's heart lyrically because it's bacteria that are formed by polluted water, and then that bacteria ends up loose in the air. So there's lots of references to the air being harder to breathe, and the
mm,
song increases in severity. At first, the red tide kisses the shore. This is not a false alarm. It's even in caps on their website. This is not a test. The next one is, and the red tide washes ashore. It's coming. You're not stopping it. Deadline approaches for the weary land. It used to be something. We could have done something about this, but we let it run down in our hands. Too late for debate, too bad to ignore. Quiet rebellion leads to open war. Bring a sea change to the factory floor, environmental, as the red tide covers the shore. That's why it's building up to this crescendo. And then, as you said, the ending is this call to arms. Now's the time to turn the tides. Now's the time to fight. Then he quotes T.S. Eliot: "Let us not go gently into the endless winter night. Don't go out with a whimper. Don't let this
mm,
destroy us."
yeah,
So it's a call to arms. That is very anthemic.
yeah. So then we get Hand Over Fist, which is a cool rocker. Again, it's a fairly straightforward song. I really like Alex's solo, but again, it's pretty short. Um, the lyrics seem to be about sort of trying to resist the impulse to isolate yourself. Um, you know, it uses the sort of rock, paper, scissors motif to, show any situation can either be advantageous or disadvantageous depending on the circumstances.
Conflict or agreement. Yeah.
Mm,
Back to the whole perception idea again. This started off actually as an instrumental, but and they planned on it to be an instrumental, but Neil kept cranking out lyrics because he was inspired by both the music that Alex and Geddy were writing and this whole lyrical motif of perception. This one being about, how can we ever agree? Try and come together with rather than conflict, try and find agreement. So rock, paper, scissors, as the nursery rhyme motif goes, there's always something that's going to counter or destroy something. There's always going to be something to argue about. There's always going to be conflict. let's find a way to agree. Let's
Yeah.
find let's go from the rock or the scissors, open up our fist, lay a hand over hand, let's agree.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No,
really like
fair enough. And then the album ends with Available Light, which starts off with this sort of slower groove of bass drums and piano. It picks up in the pre-chorus and gets intense in the chorus. Um, Geddy gets into his high register singing the song's title. He's really getting high up there. Um, the song is about being observant, using the senses to experience more of life. It's a dynamic album closer for me.
yes. And that is exactly what he's saying. It uses the concept of available light being a photography term or a cinematography term, using rather than using artificial light, see everything as it is in the here and now, experience it as you said. That whole idea of perception. This is seeing things as they really are and experiencing them. Most people, even if they don't like this album or the sound, always point to Available Light as both a writing highlight and a lyrical highlight, and a vocal highlight, as a matter of fact, too. I've heard some people on our forums say that they think this was the argument could be made. This was Getty's lyrical peak. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I definitely think it's a highlight of his career for sure.
Yeah.
So, it's a beautiful song, never played live. Most fans who like this album or like the song really wish this was one that would have been pulled out and played live at some point. This was the one we were kind of waiting for. We were happy to get Presto not played on the title track on the tour, but they played it for Time Machine in 2010. But and that went over very well. So it's nice to see the album get that love. But Available Light's the one we kind of all wanted to hear.
Yeah. Well,
So.
from the arrangement, it seems to me like it would have been quite a difficult song for just three guys on stage to play, even with their sort of triggers and all that sort of thing.
My hope was that when they toured for Clockwork Angels, when they had the string ensemble with them, this could have translated beautifully. It would have had to have been rearranged for string, but I think it
Yeah.
would have been absolutely beautiful on the Clockwork Angels tour. I
Yeah.
really hoped, but
Yeah.
oh well.
But overall, I've liked this album, like the concept, well, not concept, but the theme sort of running through it. Musically, it seemed a little like they were trying to go in a different direction, but they were still being held back by the synth era, as it were. They just couldn't resist putting those little synth parts and keys in and what have you. So
Hmm.
yeah, um, I've heard that the band actually wanted to re-record this album.
That is true. They did, and it's some people have said, why don't they just remix it? The thing is, what they used in recording it, Getty was playing his wall bass. That is a very specific sound, very European sound for that matter. And I don't want to say it's thin per se, but it's very clear and it's very clean. And then Alex was playing his signature. That has a very, he ended up switching halfway through the tour, is when he went into, sorry, my buddy Tal, I want to say it was the Paul Reed Smiths, and he went into the Gibsons. I He switched at any rate, but the point is, this was recorded very clean and very thin is the word that gets thrown around a lot, and I can't argue with it. Um, so they would have to reprocess the entire, like every track. This isn't a simple case of remixing by changing the levels and
Mm,
adding some processing. This would require every element that went to digital tape, so to speak, that went into a digital track, every element would have to be addressed.
yeah,
So it's not as simple as we can't wave our magic wand and fix this one, so to speak. But
yeah,
it is agreed that it is a looser dynamic. It is more airy than say Power Windows or Hold Your Fire, where they're so condensed with sound. This album breathes very well, and I'm borrowing that term from Todd Evans. I can't claim that one as my own. That's Todd's, but I agree with it 100%. So thanks for the
yeah,
inspiration. Um, but yeah, this album gets to breathe. It was written to be melodic, and it is. But that being said, I try and look at the bright side. It's not a perfect sound. The band's not even happy with it, and I've heard more than enough critiques from fans. But I'd say to look at the bright side of the way they recorded this, you can hear every single drum hit. You can hear every single guitar strum. You
Mm,
can hear when you thought Geddy was doing slap bass. Hear how concise that bass sounds. That's the wall. There's a reason for that sound that they wanted, and you can hear all these layers.
yeah,
So that's the upside of it. If you have to find your silver lining, which I do, that's it for this album. Is that you can hear everything they put into this.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for introducing me to this album. I've had a really good time talking about it, and it was fun to listen to. It's definitely one I'll have to go back to and sort of explore a little more. Um, for all of my viewers, you can find Paul along with many of the other people who've been in this series over at RushFans. They have a YouTube channel, they have Instagram, they have other links as well. I will leave links to all of that in the description of this video. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of the other episodes in the Bicyclelegs Discovers Rush series, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on Instagram or Twitter, I'm at bicyclelegs. And I also have a dedicated Bicyclelegs Facebook page. Please come along, give those all a follow, and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.